Hi, I am Matt Gordon. Welcome to SQL Bits, the 2020 edition that we've arrived to eventually, and thanks for coming to my session on making a company conversational using Azure Cognitive Services. Okay, so what we'll be walking through here is some ways that you can make a company conversational, which is a great title to get your boss to pay for the training to come to here. But really, what I'm trying to do is improve people's skill sets in these areas. I think Azure Cognitive Services is absolutely fascinating. Whether you're a data pro, whether you're at the start of your career, the middle, somewhere in there, if you do things with data, you can do things with this stuff. And whether you want to write a lot of code, no code, a little bit of code, there's kind of options here for all of us. And so let's walk through what this means. So here's a little bit about me. I was looking forward to being with you, but unfortunately, we're all at home right now, obviously. Um, I'm an architect for Insight DI. We do have an office in London over there. So if you're watching this and you're interested in having us kind of help you implement these things, we'd be happy to do that. I do like my job and we have a strong team, but you're not here for a sales pitch. We're here to network, grow, and learn. So here are the ways to find me so we can do that. I'm SQL at Speed basically everywhere online, and my blog is sqlatspeed.com. Look for some good content there towards the end of the year, trying to close 2020 out strong. So here's a little bit about me. What I want to do is direct you to the bottom of this slide. I know SQL Bits is not a pass event, but one thing I think that's great, one of the things that's been really an amazing experience working in kind of the Microsoft data world is how much the community gives back everywhere, whether it's DPS in India, whether it's SQL Bits in England, whether it's Pass Summit here in the States that welcomes everybody globally, just like all these events do when times are more normal. I think it's great that you're here. I think it's great that you've attended. I think it's great that you're at my session. There's so many great sessions here. Stay involved. This is a really, obviously tough time for a lot of folks, but one nice thing about kind of being in this world is that there's so much knowledge on offer. And for the most part, speakers at these things make themselves available for questions, chats, comments, whatever. I do welcome feedback on this, given all the ways that they've provided for us to do that. But stay involved in this, whether it's speaking, whether it's volunteering to run a user group or find speakers or moderate sessions for virtual events or set up displays and all that when we go back to in-person events. Anything you're doing to contribute to our little world is awesome. And thank you for it. And thanks for being here. Like I mentioned, I'm SQL at Speed everywhere online. And I mention that again for two reasons. One, I really enjoy showing this slide. I get to drive race cars once in a while. So it's been not too often this year, but if you enjoy motor racing, not too interested in any of the stuff I have to say after this, but want to talk about that, happy to do so. I can often be found on the weekends on Twitter chatting Formula One with some folks that are also speaking at this conference as well. But I kind of show this slide to lock in, like I said, tweet me, whatever. SQL at Speed, basically everywhere. So, but you didn't come to hear about me. You didn't come to hear about why volunteering and community and all that stuff is awesome. You came to learn about Azure Cognitive Services. So let's have a brief walkthrough of what our agenda is going to look like here. First, I want to start with what it is. These are, Microsoft kind of markets this under the label of AI. And so when you hear it called Cognitive Services, that can kind of stick out a bit. Not sure what that is. So we'll kind of walk through what all of that is under the covers and a little bit about how it works. We're going to talk about what the language API is. That's where we're going to focus most of our conversation here because, like the title says, this is conversational AI type of things. The demos there will include QAMaker, sentiment analysis, and a little translator app at the end that I think is pretty interesting. That for me kind of brings it all together how this works, especially if you want to dive deeply into a full code solution. So what can companies do with this stuff? that's where we're going to end it, because odds are, if your manager is paid for this, that they want you to learn things that you can bring back and say, hey, I learned this cool thing at SQL Bits and I'd like to implement it here. I'd like to tell you more about it. And you're all of that. So we're going to hopefully tie that together at the end, and I'm going to kind of sprinkle some of that throughout as well. Because like I said, I want this to be a session where there's a lot of takeaways, and there's a lot of things you can go back and say, either I can apply this at work and I think it's really cool, or I just want to apply this personally, or listen, I want to build these skill sets and maybe move on to another job where messing with this stuff is more encouraged. And you're all of that's cool. So let's dive into it. So what is Azure Cognitive Services overall? So we're going to get into some marketing speak here, which I don't usually do. But in a couple of cases here, I feel like they've explained things pretty well, and I do kind of want to cover that a bit. So what are they? They're a set of APIs, and Microsoft calls them what you see there in quotes, set of ML algorithms to solve problems in the field of AI. That's pretty boring, right? Vague, bland, marketing-y, but it's true. And I think part of the reason they've described it so broadly is because they keep developing things in this space. So I first started working with the language API and with cognitive services overall almost exactly 3 years ago. And I could do a whole presentation about everything that's changed, everything that's different, everything that works better. It's really, really cool stuff. So they've left that vague, but that's another thing I kind of want you to walk away from this session realizing is they've left it vague because they keep changing things. They keep adding stuff. So if you've seen something here and you're like, it'd be really cool if it would do this, it might. Keep plugged into it, keep playing with it. Offer feedback on docs pages and all those sorts of things. The team is very reactive. Not only do they work fast, they're pretty reactive to what people say they want, because they want people to consume this, because that's where they make money. So how do we consume it? So it's code that you can call with your own code, or with something like bots or logic apps, Power Platform stuff. Any of that is okay. And I want to kind of emphasize that point is there may be folks sitting here watching this saying, well, I'm a developer. I do some stuff with data, so I've come to Bits. This sounded interesting, but I really like to get in there, get my hands dirty, write code. Fantastic. I'm going to show you something towards the end that's going to be that. You're going to understand how all this stuff talks and what it looks like underneath and all that. If you're like, well, I just kind of came to learn about AI, I didn't know what cognitive services is, what they are, and I don't really like to write code. We're going to talk about some of that stuff too. So they make this consumable in a variety of different ways, kind of no matter what your job role is or where you're at. So carry that with you as we go through some of the demos and things like that. If there's something that's not quite hitting you where you're at, that's okay. There's going to be something later probably that does. Or if you get to the end, and hopefully you're not a bit lost, but if you're like, oh my goodness, I don't know C# and I'm not sure I knew what was happening there, that's okay, because you can do everything we show before then as well. So how do you use them? So they can be consumed via standard REST calls. And so that's important for the devs watching this to understand that. Standard REST calls, I've got the documentation link there at the bottom, and I know that the slides will be on the site soon. The documentation is fantastic, and there are a lot of people have talked about what new Microsoft is and isn't, and kind of where they've made strides and where they may have not. But the documentation specifically in this space is really excellent, and it's not just, well, it does a great job being thorough and it explains every API call you make and every parameter you can feed it, and it's thorough that way. There's a lot of examples. There's a lot of quick starts. The app I built at the end is actually built off a Microsoft quick start. So that, if you walk out of here and you're like, oh, what would be interesting? I wonder if I can do this with it. There's a lot of kind of pre-built stuff or almost built stuff that you can grab. And so, like I said, if none of these demos kind of hit you, there's probably more out there. And it seems like the team's always kind of feeding stuff in there as well. So the documentation is not only a good fit to learn about the topic and learn about how to call these as kind of just raw docs, but also lots and lots of examples in a variety of languages. So I'll show C Sharp, there's Python languages, or Python language examples, there's Java. Like I said, it's probably going to meet you wherever you're at. And if you're not cool with that, we're going to go through Logic Apps. We're going to go through QAMaker and another tool that they have where we haven't written a line of code to do anything. We've just clicked stuff and made stuff go. So if that's how you want to play, good on you, and we can do that as well. So here's the list. So the list is 5. We start with vision. Vision's pretty cool. And these are brief descriptions out to the side. Don't do any of these justice, honestly. But vision's pretty cool. So you can analyze images, you can analyze videos in there. And I know like there's a friend of mine that gives a session, and one of her examples, in fact, is you there are static cameras on like floodplains and stuff, and then it's using the vision API basically to understand the difference between an image that is flooded and one that's not, and then it kind of calls that out, and then you can take action based on that. So that's just one example. There's tons of cool demos about vision. Language is what originally caught my eye, so that's what this session is about. Like I said, I've worked with it probably 3 years and have gotten a lot of interesting feedback over the years on what people are doing with it. And so that's what we're going to kind of sprinkle throughout here. But vision's really cool. And what I like about this talk is when you've gotten to the end and you kind of understand programmatically what's going on, you're able to translate or transfer a lot of that knowledge to these other ones as well. And I think that's pretty important because these are so much fun to play with, and there's so many different things you can do with it. So if it strikes your fancy at all, then I think you're going to have the tools after this session to work with any of this. So we've got vision there. We talked about it. We've got speech. So speech and language go hand in hand. I'll refer to speech a couple times. Especially in a virtual venue like this, where unfortunately, I don't have speakers here where I can play audio and those sorts of things. I had originally hoped to do a demo that I thought would have been really fascinating, but really only worked in a room where it was going to bring language and speech together. But you'll hear me refer to that throughout, that these APIs are built to work together. So that's part of the reason they work similarly in a lot of ways. Part of the reason the documentation is so thorough. They even have some kind of cross API examples. So don't just be like, well, I saw, Matt said that language can do this, and I'd really like to see that on the speech side. It probably does it, or it probably interacts in the way that you think. You just kind of need to seek that out. And again, the docs make it very easy to do that. Language is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time here, so I will not belabor that point anymore. And we'll spend the next several minutes doing that. Decision is basically enhanced search for research. So it does more than that. Like I said, none of these descriptions do it justice. I just want you to be kind of lightly familiar with all of these. But it is kind of tailored if you're trying to find academic research and things like that. Sometimes Google is not always the best at that, and where those types of things are stored. And Decision is an API kind of built to do that and more. Web search does what it says there. It applies ML to web and Azure searches and things like that. And again, for all these, there's a lot of good Microsoft resources and demos, whether it's in examples, whether it's when they've gone to conferences and spoken about this. So if any of that interests you beyond what we're going to talk about here, there it is. So those are the 5 as of when this is being recorded. So hopefully it doesn't change. Hopefully marketing doesn't change the names. But anyway, just to set the table for now, here we are. So I chose to focus on language because that's what kind of captured me. And I can briefly tell the story of how I got into it. I actually built something for a football podcast here in the States, not American football, what the rest of the world calls it. And they joked about a year where Manchester City was running away with the league, had won the first 8 or 9 matches, and that they were jokingly going to close the podcast and not record it anymore because the results didn't matter. Money had ruined football, such is life. But they said, we could go on with our podcast if only we had a way to classify the supporters and how they feel. Though that's the only rank that really matters. They said if we just had a table where we could do that, then we'll carry on with our podcast. And I heard that, had just started reading about this thanks to an old boss of mine, Brad Ball, who's now at Microsoft. And I emailed them and said, I think I can build you what you want. I know you were kidding, but I know I've listened to the podcast long enough where sometimes you're kidding, people build it and you use it. And so we used it. We actually ran a table for most of the season 3 years ago that they called Mood Table. That was supporter mood, sentiment analysis, all that. I'll show you some of that later. That may seem like a story. Like, why are you telling us how you got interested in it? The data world is expanding so fast and incorporating AI and things like that, that, even if this, you're like, well, I didn't really like that, I didn't get anything out of it. There's so much cool stuff going on in the world that we're all professionally in. Keep your ears open, keep your eyes open, see if there's something that interests you. That's something like that. I wasn't doing anything with this stuff at work 3 years ago. I just thought it sounded like fun. So kind of grab onto it there, because this has given me a lot of cool opportunities to speak at SQL Bits, to speak at other large conferences and things like that, and do some other side work, and you know, it, keep your eyes and ears open. The last thing I want you to take away from this slide is that the majority of the communication that these things do is under the covers via JSON. And so you'll see that towards the end. Like I said, I kind of build up from no and low code to a lot of code right at the end. And if you're interested in that and kind of the rails that these things ride, that demo at the end is going to bring that together for you. But just broad statement here, especially the way these talk back and forth. It's a lot of JSON going back and forth. So what is the language API? And let's see, these people on this slide may not know, but this slide knows. So what does Microsoft say it is? And like I said, I put a couple of their descriptions in here because I think they're interesting. And they do kind of help us understand what they are. And it's not just marketing speak, though there's a little bit of that in there. So what does Microsoft say? The language API, as you can see there, increases your application's ability to read, comprehend, and enrich written text. Again, vague. But you'll see on the next slide when I talk about kind of the high level functions and features that it has and what it does, that describes it really well. Some of it is for reading, some of it is enhanced understanding of what the text is and what that means for us, whether it's sentiment or something like that. And some of it is enriching written text for accessibility reasons. For instance, you can see hopefully down at the bottom of this that we're actually using Cognitive Services Live here, and the subtitles at the bottom are essentially calling out to that, more or less. And so that hopefully for somebody where maybe video isn't quite the right format, they're at least seeing written subtitles and things like that, and that's helping them. And we're going to actually start off with something that very much meets that enrichment goal of whether you're trying to learn a language or increase your skills in that language or have other challenges that make language difficult. They're trying to do some things that help you there. So this isn't all just about cool stuff and how can we make money and sell customers stuff. There's some helpful stuff here too, which is cool. It makes it fun to work on. So what do I say? Basically, all this stuff helps us and our applications talk to users, customers, people who might be a user or a customer in the future. It just helps us talk better. And again, like when you get to translation, I may not speak the language that you do, but if I'm offering a product you want, I have some pretty easy ways to wire things up where you can come to my website and I can talk to you in the language that you say you speak. And I've not had to code much to do that. And that's kind of where we'll leave things off later. So is it just one API? No. Apologies for the terminology here. You'll hear me say API and APIs pretty interchangeably. It's not just one. We're calling a lot of stuff here. And that's kind of how the whole suite works. So what can you do with it? So I've kind of ranked these out of order, and there's a method to my madness here a bit. So the first thing is I want to show you that they're doing good stuff before we get into the things that maybe are going to help us make a little more money or sell a little more product or something like that. So Immersive Reader is where we're going to start off. This was in preview until late August. So I just want to have a brief aside there. If you encounter things within Cognitive Services that are in preview, don't let that scare you off. When we did the Premier League mood table, the sentiment analysis, the text analytics API, which is the part of language that does the sentiment analysis, was in preview the whole time I ran it. On a busy match weekend, we would push 25 or 30 million tweets through Logic Apps, handling those against an Azure SQL database running on basic tier. So not a lot of horsepower, not a lot of money. I was paying for it myself because I thought it was cool to be on a highly rated podcast. But it was in preview the whole time, and I saw the failure rates really didn't change whether it was in preview or out. So it strikes me that Microsoft may be really reluctant to take that preview label off of these. Don't let that scare you and be like, oh, it's in preview, that's like beta, I shouldn't use it. Not true. You can use it pretty confidently based on my experience. So we're going to start there. We're going to head on to language understanding, which is Luis, which you'll see once we get there. We're going to go from there to QAMaker, and that's the part where I say we're out of order. In my opinion, Luis builds on QAMaker, but there's a reason that I show it to you that way, and we'll get to that here in a few minutes. We're going to do text analytics. That's got things like sentiment analysis, entity linking, things like that. And we're going to wrap up using the translator API and translator text. So what can I do with Immersive Reader? And this is the only one I don't demo. If you're really interested in this, especially if you work in education or something like that, there's wonderful demos on Microsoft's site that honestly I don't think I could do better. And I would direct you there. And in the resources slide, there's some links. But what can you do with it? And this is the last time we're going to have marketing speak in here, but I really like the way they phrase this because I think it perfectly describes everything I'm about to tell you. So what does this do? Title, we're not sure what it does, what that means. So in their language, it says it helps emerging readers, language learners, and people with learning differences absorb the written content on your site or in your app. So for sure, maybe you're bringing in some more customers who are dealing with some issues or challenges in these areas. But really what this is intended for is learning. And so what's some of the things we can do? So these are kind of my favorites. It can do a lot more. And like I said, I definitely invite you, if this is the part you're really interested in, this is the part I've used the least, but I like it. So definitely go to the site and check out some of their quick starts, demos, things like that. So what can you do? You can change the viewable size of the text, which makes sense. If somebody is challenged with vision or something like that, that makes sense to do that. That's maybe not that interesting. That's not very AI-y, right? Some of this stuff is. So it can display tooltip pictures of commonly used words. That builds on some of the text analytics stuff we're going to talk about later. So hopefully when we get to the text analytics part and talk entity linking and things like that, you're going to be like, okay, it does that, so it can do this. And that's somewhere, even within the language API, these things work together as well. You can highlight the nouns and verbs in a sentence. So if somebody is new to a language and trying to understand grammar and sentence structure and all those sorts of things, that can be great for them and a good way to start to know not only the vocabulary, but how to properly speak it, write it, all those sorts of things. You can read the content out loud. It's bringing the speech API into something that's a language API function. If you go to the website for this, it's going to say Immersive Reader lives here and does this. It's using the speech API to do that. It can display the syllables of words as well. So we're building on people's ability to say the words, pronounce them, sound them out, those sorts of things. And it uses the translator API, another example here, to translate the content into another language. So you can translate it back and forth. And for some people, they may learn that way where they just kind of need to see that switch back and forth. And it makes the light bulb go on for them. So that's Immersive Reader. Like I said, if you work in education or something like that, where you're like, wow, this is great, this has really grabbed me, and I want to learn how to build this into things that I do, definitely hit the site for more detail there. My professional experience is the lowest on this, to be completely candid, but it's really cool. So, Luis. So you notice I called it language understanding, then said Luis there. So Luis stands for Language Understanding Intelligent Service. Luis probably rolls off the tongue a little easier. So what are some of the things we can do here? So this is where the conversational aspect comes in. So Immersive Reader, you're not really talking back and forth with it, but it's really important to get to the point where you can talk back and forth with a website or an app or something like that. So it determines the intents of the statements, and I'll show you a couple examples there. It attempts to isolate the entities in the statement as well. So that's where it starts to build that conversation, build that understanding. It returns a JSON object when it's called. Best example of this is if you go to a website and you see the super friendly and overly perky person in the lower corner that pops up with like a fake chat thing that says, "I'm here to help." That's probably Luis under the covers, or a similar offering from somebody like Amazon. Um, and that's how this works. And it does talk back and forth. So what it does, it provides pre-built models, which I'll show you briefly, allows you to create custom models as well, which I'll show you briefly. You can build an app, you can build, just like any of this, you can build it using APIs into something you already have or via the Luis portal. So for a quick demo, let's hit the Luis portal and I'll kind of show you how this works. So these are a couple that I built. So we're not going to go to the custom first. We're going to go to the chat app. And we're going to, okay, so this was a pre-built entity. So there's pre-built domains here. So if I go to create a new app, which unfortunately we don't have time for here, but if I go to create a new app, you're going to see things like restaurant reservation, book flight, though that's not particularly popular right now, those sorts of things. So I'm using this to kind of help you understand what intents and entities are, and then we'll move on from here. So when you click into this, this is pre-built, and you can see there's a train button here. So you're training these models as you add more feedback to them, whether you're typing it in here because you want to kind of expand its ability to train itself against a data set, or you're trying to import like lots of data, or you're getting logging off your chat app and you're realizing that the way you thought people asked a certain question, they're actually not. So maybe you would bring that in here as well. But you see where it identifies the entities in here. So it gets that the intent, we're in the restaurant reservation intent. And you see where it identifies, like, here's the time, here's the place name we need to call Barclay Prime. Again, here's the time, name, those sorts of things. Typically don't need a reservation to go to KFC, but I always get a kick out of that because just that's kind of the examples of what the change reservation intent is, and then how it parses out the other entities in there and identify those to you. And you also have the ability to filter these out and change them in some other ways. But again, the point of the pre-built something is if you're a restaurant, you could wire up a chatbot on top of a Luis model like this, and you don't have to do a lot of the work. So let's look at some of the entities it's got. And I really want to quickly go here to highlight two different types. So you've got address, you've got meal type. So meal type you see as a list. So let's go there first. What's meal type? It's a type of meal. So you would add synonyms in here, maybe for your restaurant. Breakfast and brunch are the same thing. For a lot of restaurants, they're not. But here are the list items. And again, there's no examples here. And I want to show you something that I think is kind of interesting. So we've looked at the meal type entity. Let's look at one of the machine learned ones. So we've got schema and features, pretty straightforward. And we've got, so again, here, this is basically where Luis in action is building and training itself. And again, as you pull this in, you're then adding to the data set that's being trained. And so it's got examples, like somebody asked, where's the sushi restaurant where I have reservations? It's scoring that pretty high. Oh, I understand. Yeah, that's a cuisine type that I need to handle. And just in case you're interested, here are some of the pre-built domains they have. These are the most popular. It's not necessarily limited to this, but we have calendar, communication, email, utilities, weather, web, things like that, and of course restaurant reservation, which we just had a look at. So let's quickly go back to my apps, and we'll go to the custom app. So I want to show you something. I built this. There's almost nothing here, and what I think is interesting. So I built an intent to agree, where I want my bot to say, yep, yep, and I threw some things in there. Yes, go ahead, sounds good. And I made up a fake donut shop that doesn't exist, unfortunately, which my family is very upset. We can't actually order donuts, even though this exists here. And I've put a few examples in here. And unfortunately, for time, I won't be able to show this. But what's interesting is you see that's basic. I've got, you know, 3 examples under agree, 5 under greetings. None is just kind of nonsense, just mostly kind of for fun. It's something that's completely off the beaten path because I wanted to see how it handles it. I've got 4 examples for order donut. And it knows. So if I come in here and try to order a pizza, it knows that that's not the order donut entity because I've trained it. And again, you've got all this knowledge kind of within here that helps you out and kind of uh, even something you've built that's very basic and you may not know what you're doing, you can still build something useful pretty fast, even if you build it custom. But let's get back to the slides here because we've definitely got a fair amount to cover in our time. Okay, so that's Luis. So when you see a chatbot built on top of this, and I know there are other sessions around that go deep in the chatbot, and unfortunately here in about 50 minutes to an hour, we just can't do that justice. But this is what's underneath those mostly. But I do this first because you can see where a conversation is going to come from there. Like it's parsing things to get context and get the entities out of there and understand what you're asking, and even if you ask it in a very clumsy way. QAMaker comes up next. And what that is basically a very rote, fixed way to do what we just saw, but there's not flexibility to it. I have a quick demo that'll show you that. So what can you do with this? Like it sounds like, it serves an answer. So you can serve that information interactively. Somebody asks you something and it serves an answer. How does it do that? It drives off what Microsoft calls a knowledge base, which is just a set of questions and answers. You can link them to do kind of a multi-turn conversation. You cannot. You can have them be very static. The example I'll show is pretty static. You can upload stuff. You can type it all in yourself. I'll show briefly how you do that. You can upload an Excel spreadsheet full of these. You can upload a tab separated values file full of these. You can drive it off a web page. You can point it at something, say, I want to talk to this web page, and don't have to write a line of code to do it. So it's in Luis's realm. It's not as cool. It's more of a fixed offering, but it's fast. The demo I'm going to show you, I built in about 10 minutes earlier this year. And I kind of left it that way because I could overcomplicate it, but I want to show you how easy it is to get something that's useful here. So the flexibility in this doesn't come from the implementation and its ability to have a conversation and all the ML kind of underneath it that's making that go. It comes from the information that you provide. So on that note, let's flip over quickly to the demo here and let's have a look. Okay, so what I've got here is a knowledge base, and I'll show you what this is. So again, I've gone to QAMaker.ai, I've signed in, and we've got our knowledge base information. Sometimes this can take a minute. Thankfully, right then it did not. So what we've got here is you kind of see these lists of questions, right? And it gives a source. And that source is an FAQ page for basically an exotic car track day thing here in Florida. I've never been to it, cannot endorse their services or not, but it made for a very nice demo, and I got to read about car stuff, which obviously I always like to do. So this is my knowledge base. This is what we're going to talk to. And you can add follow-up prompts to give that conversational element. You can add alternative phrasing. So again, if you've built a bot and it's logging off that instead of people saying, are you open every day or every week, they're saying, when are you open? Then you can add that alternative phrasing to direct it to this answer here. But let's talk to it and let's see what it does. So what I've got is I've built this, and this is a bot. So you test it in web chat in the portal, makes a nice interface for the demo here. But what I want to point out is if you go to build or you go to channels, it's actually going to give you some iframe code to put this bot. So I provisioned a simple web app bot basically over the top of my knowledge base. It'll give you iframe code to put this on a website. So you could take something I'm showing you here. I'm by no means a web designer at all. My gifts and talents do not lie in that area, but I know what an iframe is, and I could probably crudely plug one in, and certainly somebody who's more capable in that realm could. So let's flip back quickly. I want to just show you how to create a knowledge base. We're not going to go all the way through it. It takes a few minutes, but you do it simply. The steps are just as easy as they say. Create a service. You've got some Azure information here, subscription, directory ID, those sorts of things. You name it, you populate it. Like I said, it's got PDFs, docs, Excel, or you can just type stuff in like you just show. You can give it a bit of a personality. If you want it to make chit chat, if you want the answers to be a little bit cutesy, you can do that. And then the last step is just create. So I've already done that, and we're about to talk to this. So it gives us a friendly greeting here, and I want to know if I can bring my friends. So I'm going to ask, can I bring guests? Yes, guests are free to join. Cool. But this is where I want to separate it. You're like, well, why would I build a Luis thing and go and have intents and entities and that look more complicated than this? Why would I want to do that? Because if I ask Luis, can I bring other people? I'm going to get to the place I need to be. It's because of the intents and the entities and the models that are being, trained and scored underneath that. I'm going to end up in the same point in the conversation where I should be. When I ask what you and I would know to be the same thing, this picks out the wrong thing. So I ask, can I bring other people, which sounds a lot like guests, right? And basically because it sees the word other in here in reference to passengers. So it's again like it's ML, but it's not very smart. It thinks I asked something else when I ask the same question over again. So I'll talk at the end about what I think QAMaker is great for. There's a couple examples that I think will resonate with most, but I want to kind of show you where that flexibility falls down. All right, so let's get back to the slides, go through a few more things. Text analytics. So what can you do with it? So I picked the highlights. This is by no means a complete set. This is just the stuff that I think is interesting to me or potentially like professionally relevant. So I can do key phrase extraction. And so basically what that means, so if you've seen a word cloud or something like that, it's very much what powers that. That can be helpful, like if you're trying to analyze, let's say you've released a new version of a product and your company has support forums or something like that. You could pretty quickly run that against kind of unstructured text and say, oh, people are really happy. The key phrases it's pulling out is excited, wonderful, blah, blah, blah. Or, oh my goodness, most of these key phrases actually have curse words in them and they're not very happy. And we need to dive more into this and figure out what's going on. And you can wire that in with sentiment analysis as well. You don't have to. You could take that key phrase extraction and put it in like a word cloud visualization in Power BI. There's a way to wire that up. And so there's some interesting things you can do there. But that's basically what key phrase extraction is. Or if you've ever gone to Yelp or like a restaurant review site, and it'll say like this restaurant is known for tasty pasta, wonderful sauce. It's using that technology under the covers to pull that out. Language detection, pretty cool how it works. Not too exciting to talk about. It figures out the language that's being spoken and does it. And so then named entity recognition is kind of the next thing, and that builds in entity linking. The nomenclature here gets really confusing, and I don't like it, but it is what it's called, so I want you to understand what it's called. So named entity recognition, like I said, it's both of these. So entity linking is basically if you see a link in some text and it's linking off to, well, this is a person, this is currency, this is a time range, so maybe I'm going to create a calendar appointment here or something like that. That's what's making that go. The named entity recognition part, or I'm sorry, entity linking, what it does is it uses context clues. It does what Microsoft says, it identifies and disambiguates the identity of an entity found in text. And so basically it's using context clues and, again, those trained models underneath that we don't have to build, that we don't have to manage. to know, for instance, if you're talking about Venus the planet or Venus the goddess, and then kind of correctly point you, whether it's to a web link for more information or a link, for something to book a tour or whatever. It's all that's kind of going on under the covers to do that. Sentiment analysis, like I said, for me, this is what brought me into the world of language API, and I think it's the most interesting. And so that's where we're going to kind of end this slide here. And we're going to hop to the demo of using Twitter sentiment analysis and Azure Logic Apps. So let's go ahead and check that out. And back to the portal we go. Very well. Okay, so Logic Apps, if you don't know what those are, I love sneaking those into this talk. Logic Apps are really cool. And if you submitted a talk that said Azure Logic Apps 101, woo, nobody's going to come. Because they don't know what they are, a lot of folks. But what they are is workflow, basically event-driven workflow containers. So not containers in the Kubernetes or Docker sense, containers in like the Tupperware sense, like it's a dish kind of that we can put in whatever, but an event kicks it off. So basically you create a connector and that then you define an event that happens there. And for this, it's when a new tweet is posted, and I'll walk you through the flow of how this works. There are almost 300 connectors now, first party, so it can connect to most any social media service. It can connect to ServiceNow. So if you want to kick something off where like support tickets come in or something like that. There's a lot in the healthcare world as well. So if you want, some sort of event happens in like an EMR system or EHR system or something like that, Logic Apps can handle all that. And they're kind of serverless and stateless. When the event happens, they spin up, they do their thing, and then they stop. They're awesome. You can do all kinds of stuff with them. This talk is not about them, so let's get back to what these are. So what I did is I've already pre-provisioned a text analytics resource. Again, that's dry, and in the 50-ish minutes we have here, just not something I'm able to show because it's a lot of click and wait 2 minutes. If you really want more information about that, want kind of the nitty gritty of how that works, if you go to my blog at sqlatspeed.com, do a search for the words deep dive, you'll actually see the way I built the mood table for the football podcast here in the States. And that is in gory detail how all that worked, what goes in what dialog box, what ID is for what. Super boring to talk about, but if you want to go build this, and I show you that with screenshots and text and all that stuff there. But we'll just kind of briefly run through this here. So when a new tweet is posted, what am I going to do? So you put search text in here. I'll hold the tooltip and it says you can put search terms in here in quotes. You can put hashtags. If you want all the tweets at a handle. So say your company is at Widget Co. You could capture all those tweets. You tell it how often you want to check for items. Important thing here, because when I first started playing with this, I had a day of analyzing football, 10 matches, 20 clubs, spent over $700 because the documentation here, despite requests to change it, is not quite right. So it's only how often you want to check for items if there's not a run of the Logic app active. So say if you're analyzing Premier League Football Club Twitter, there are fans all over the world, every time zone. So the match is on, it's incredibly active, even for the small clubs. A lot of advertising services going on there too, on all the match hashtags and against club handles and all that. The tweets never stopped. And so it never, like I had it set for every 15 minutes. I was going to capture sentiment basically 7 times through a match, 90 minutes plus 15-minute halftime. It never stopped. And so I was analyzing, like I said, like probably 30 or 35 million tweets that first match weekend. Cognitive Services is built on a consumption basis, tons and tons of calls, and it never went away. So if you're analyzing something really busy like that for cost management reasons, and I have something on this on my blog as well, you'll want to set up a Logic app using what's called a recurrence trigger. And that's how you schedule it. And basically that Logic app wakes up on a schedule and kills this one. So if you have one that's running a long ways, that's something we can chat about more offline. Feel free to reach out to me if that's interesting. Again, we don't really have time here, but for cost management, I do want to highlight that. So we're searching for dogs. Then what I did is I came down here, I did insert a new step. and I'll kind of show you what that looks like. So I added an action. In the action, I went and chose text analytics. And again, the screenshots are on my blog on kind of how this works. I chose the text sentiment. And so what that is, I come in here. So if I highlight here, how do I know what text? Like, how do I pull the tweet text out? So what you'll see is your connector up here feeds dynamic content, as they say here, and it's basically a return set from everything it gets out of that tweet. So it could be the tweet text, who tweeted it, description, name, username, all those sorts of things. So I detected sentiment there, and once upon a time, this used to stream to a Power BI streaming data set, which it's capable of doing. Again, for reasons of time, I'll highlight that, show you it exists here. We're not actually going to walk through it. There are good resources both on my blog and the Microsoft blogs as well for the details of how to set that up. But so what I've got here is I did an insert row action against a SQL server, basically an Azure SQL database in this case. And here's my table name, and here's all the stuff: username, tweet text, description, location, retweet count, sentiment score. So I'm pulling all that in. When I do that, what does this look like? So this was actually created for a side company I used to have with a friend of mine who is a West Ham supporter. So I'm not sure how you feel about that, but there he is. And I'll also call out there is some raw language in these tables. So I'll try not to scroll a whole lot, but if some of that bothers you a little bit, sorry. So we're going to see what the sentiment score is. So I've talked a lot about what sentiment score is, right? Basically, 1 is the most positive, 0 is the most negative. You never see 1 and you never see 0. It's either very high or very low, oftentimes in the middle. And with this uses version 2 of the API. Now with version 3, it can actually better handle larger portions of text. And what the ability that gives you is you can kind of analyze a flow. Say, well, the introduction is very positive, the middle is moderate, the conclusion is very negative. And again, that might be helpful if you're analyzing, like I said, message board posts or something like that. But we'll just a couple brief examples from Twitter here. So this is somebody that says, frustrating to see so many calls on a player at a league here in the States. If you know your MLS football, you're going to know what club this is. And so that's not overly negative. We don't see swear words in there. We don't say, I'm so angry, or really angry emojis or something like that. But I understand frustration is bad. 0.001, that's very negative. So let's look at something that's good. So this is somebody who went, first pro soccer game. I enjoyed it so much. Thanks, blah, blah, blah. Very high. So 2 basic crude examples, but that's kind of how that works. And that's what sentiment score is. Like I said, version 3 will actually return this in sections and tell you it was 40% negative and 20% positive. I think this is an easier way to show it, but version 3 offers you more capabilities for larger bits of language, going beyond social media posts and things like that. So let's get back to the slides and wrap this up. Okay, so what we've got here, translator. This is the last thing we're going to do, last thing we're going to demo. A couple things to understand here. We can translate text using neural machine translation. That is using neural networks to do it. It's considered to be faster, more precise, all those sorts of things. You'll see, so translator works on roughly 60 plus languages right now. The documentation, they'll actually update to reflect whether it's using NMT or something called SMT, which is statistical machine translation. So a lot less machine learning going on there, and considered to be less precise, slower, all those sorts of things. NMT is the majority of the languages, not all of them. Translator can also transliterate text, so it can convert from one alphabet to another, which is very cool. It can be used to detect language. We've referred to that a couple times here. Obviously, it would be capable of that. You can use it to look up word translations as well. Strictly speaking text, like I said, had we been in person, I had a cool demo with speech. Doesn't really translate to this medium, so unfortunately we'll kind of leave that by the wayside. But what I'm about to show you in this demo is very similar to how you'd handle speech. So here's a C# console app. Let's watch it go, and then I'll walk through a couple things. So we've got this ready to run. And there we go. And it's going to say, thank you for welcoming me to SQL bits. Okay, so I want to highlight a couple things. So we've got our translations here. We have it in Italian, which I don't speak. I assume that that's accurate. We have it in German, which I speak a little. I'm pretty sure that's right. And if you're a Star Trek fan, that I am told, according to the documentation, is Klingon. I don't actually know, but supposedly it is, so I always get kind of a kick out of that. So what we've done is we've translated this into 4 different languages. And this is the raw JSON that comes back. So we've got the detected language part, we have an array of the translations, and then we have kind of cleaned up output towards the bottom. And I've just pointed at the screen and you've not seen that. So pretty simple, powerful though. We just translated something in 4 different languages like that. So let's walk through a little bit of how we did that, and we'll bring this to a strong close. I'm not going to go line by line here. I'm the last person you want walking you line through line, or line by line through a C# app. And that would be a really boring way to end this off. So want to call out a couple things. Is the route is basically the end of the API call. So you can see here, we've used API version 3. Here's the list of the languages using 2 equals. And again, this is built off of Microsoft Quick Start as well. If you want to go heavily in depth to some of the stuff that I built to make the rest of this go, that's based on their stuff. We're reading in, what we want to translate. We've stored subscription key and endpoint in environment variables. That's an important call out here. If I hadn't done that, you'd see my raw subscription and you'd see my endpoint here. You could then use that to run up my Azure bill, which I would not appreciate. But from a security standpoint, kind of in a corporate environment especially, make sure you put those in environment variables rather than having them raw in code, because then everybody that sees the code can see it. Then here's where the translate text request actually happens. So it builds the API call here using some of the content we just talked about. It says, okay, I'm encoding this as UTF-8. This is JSON document coming to you. Here's my subscription key, more or less my password to talk to you. And again, that's hidden, like I said. So got to be safe and smart. And then what happens here is, and we're using just basic stuff. I didn't write anything to do this. It deserializes the JSON to come back. That's why I have this show 4 things, is it pulls each translation out that we just saw in the raw JSON, and it outputs that. And so then you've got it. And that this is not, I am by no means a C# expert, but based off the quick start and my understanding of how this stuff works, it's pretty easy to build something like this. And again, it's crude, but I've just translated something into 4 languages. And if we had more time, you could see it go back and forth, and we could kind of hop around. And it really is just that easy. And I mean, we're looking in total, this is 130 lines of code-ish. So very powerful, very cool. I love talking about this stuff, but you probably are sick of hearing me talk about it. So let's wrap this up. So what can companies do with this stuff? Immersive Reader, we kind of went over that. It makes your online presence and user experience, if this is a kind of a corporate thing, adds to how inclusive and welcoming that is. Also, a lot of use cases in education, obviously. Very cool stuff. Luis, we went through a basic thing that's so deep it really deserves its own sessions, and I know in the community there are ones out there. Sam Nazar from the States does one that is really in depth, and I would invite you to seek him out. He's on Twitter at SamNasr, and he's got some good sessions on this that certainly taught me a lot and more in depth than what I've just shown. But that's one of those no code or low code. So what I showed, I just built with clicks. And like we said, you could do that with API calls, but I didn't, and you don't have to. And you could put a chat bot right on top of that. For QAMaker, we did put a chat bot right on top of that. I didn't do any code to do that. That was all Azure portal work. My favorite use case for this, especially for a conference like we're at, is for support desks. This is huge. If somebody's always coming to you and saying, what server does this live on, and what environment is this, and where do I go for that, and what data center does this live in? If you've got a master spreadsheet of all that stuff, if you don't, you should. And once you do, upload it somewhere, make a knowledge base out of it, and say, here's our internal website. Here's the chatbot I built. Go ask it where this stuff is. And then that's off your plate. And you can focus on doing the part of your job that's more fun than just answering the same questions over and over again. Text analytics, we went into a lot of detail about what you can do with that. If you have any online presence at all, sentiment analysis is huge. I have a whole other session I give about companies that have made basically social media mistakes and didn't get in front of them because they weren't doing sentiment analysis at all or properly to understand what had happened to them, what they did, and what people thought about it. So we've just given that a taste there. When we talked about portals and message boards and things like that, anywhere customers are writing things about you, you want to be on top of what that means, whether you own it or whether it's on social media. Translator text, kind of obvious if we need to translate stuff. That's what our go-to is going to be there. It also, even though localization isn't trivial and it's not done there, if you need to localize like user documentation or the web interface or something like that, the translator API kind of gets you 95% of the way there. You're still going to want a native speaker probably to analyze that and make sure you haven't made any dialect mistakes or a slight thing that the translation's a little bit off, but it's done all the heavy lifting for you. You just need a brief review and then you're ready to go. So that's it from me. We're close to time, maybe a couple minutes over. Thanks for bearing with me, but I love talking about this stuff and I try to jam a whole bunch into this time. These are all the different ways to find me. Like I said, the deep dive for a lot of what I talked about here is on my blog at sqlatspeed.com. Resources slide is here. But this is me. Thank you so much for having me, and hopefully we'll be able to see each other next year in person. Bye for now.